Okay. Today we are going to do something a bit different. We're doing something very unique and ultra rare, and that is a Sunday recording of the Parsha podcast. Of course, with the help of the Almighty, we release a brand new episode each Wednesday evening, and even this episode will not be released until Wednesday evening. But you see, this week is traveling week for the Wolbe family. The truth is, I had a flight scheduled to Israel. My niece got married on Thursday night. I didn't want to miss it, but alas, Italian Airlines canceled all flights to and from Tel Aviv. I was scheduled to be arriving back in Canada today on Sunday. Flights were canceled due to the potential of escalation in the region, which actually happened. It happened overnight on Sunday morning. Hezbollah was going to launch thousands of rockets and missiles at Israeli military and civilian installations. And late last night here on the East Coast, on I guess it was 10 or 11 o'clock Eastern time, Israel launched a preemptive strike, which it seems like it was very successful. But as the recording today, early Sunday morning, there's still ongoing hostilities and rockets in both directions. And we hope and pray that our boys, our brethren, and all the communities in Israel are safe and they succeed in vanquishing their enemies. And we hear only good news from that front. For us, it's still traveling week. As soon as I finish recording, please God, I'll begin the long and arduous and unenviable journey back to Houston. Early this morning, my wife and several of my children, they flew out. I'm driving only with my son Yitzi, and there was a real risk of not having a Parsha podcast this week. See, this is the transition week. School starts on Thursday, and I'm going to be driving for 3 days. And when I arrive in Houston, please God, hopefully all will be well. I'll be all groggy and disheveled and sweaty and not in the mood of making my way to the Torch Center. And I was worried. We may miss a week, and that will be a real shame because we've had a very long streak of uninterrupted Parsha podcasts each week. And actually, this week, Parshas Re'eh, it's the first week in year 5 of our streak. So with the help of the Almighty, we will hopefully stave off disaster and keep the Parsha podcast streak alive. And it's Sunday. Usually we have some more time to let the ideas marinate and let them develop and let them emerge fully baked. So there's a risk that this one may be a bit too doughy and underdeveloped. Maybe it's not baking for as long as typical. You let me know. You be the judge. Send me an email, rabbiwolbe@gmail.com. This week is Parshas Re'eh. It's the 4th installment of the book of Deuteronomy. And I want to analyze 2 different parts of the Parsha, but really ones that have a similar theme. If you look at our Parsha, there are a lot of mitzvos. In fact, 55 of the 630 mitzvos are found in our Parsha. Almost 10% of all the mitzvos in the whole Torah are found in this week's Parsha. And many, many mitzvos in our Parsha relate to idolatry. In fact, the first mitzvah of the Parsha, Moshe tells the nation, you're about to enter the land of Canaan. It's a land that is brimming with idolatry. You must surely destroy all of those idolatrous installations. You're coming to this land, and you're going to find it just absolutely engorged with idolatry. Abed ta'abdun, you should surely destroy. Rashi points out that there's a double verb. Destroy, you shall destroy. You have to completely and thoroughly and totally obliterate and uproot idolatry from the land. The Torah is unequivocal. No idolatry must remain in the land. And the verse continues. You should shatter their altars. You should smash their pillars. You should burn their idolatrous trees. You should take their molten images and other elements of idolatry and you should uproot it, and you should destroy it, and you should eliminate it, and you should shatter it. You should completely cleanse the land from idolatry. This is part of the nation's mission. You're going to arrive in the land, you must eliminate idolatry. This is one of the repeating themes of the Parsha, really of the book. Warnings, repeated warnings, not to fall prey to idolatry. Again and again, we're told, we're cautioned. Don't capitulate and don't be swept away and swept in to the vortex of the idolatrous practices of your soon-to-be neighbors. Shatter their idols, uproot their idolatrous trees, obliterate their altars, systematically destroy every remnant, every vestige of the heretical paganism that is implanted in the land. By my count, there are 12 distinct mitzvahs in our parsha that relate to idolatry. So the first one we just mentioned, that's to destroy all the idolatry and its paraphernalia and accoutrements in the land. The next mitzvah is a prohibition against hearkening, against obeying, against listening to an idolatrous false prophet. And then we have 6 mitzvahs that relate to a person who's trying to entice other people to follow the ways of idolatry. You have a rotten apple, someone amongst your nation, your people. He's trying to convince you to follow him and to go serve the idols. And there's 6 separate mitzvos that instruct us how we are to behave towards this person. We have to really hunt them down. We can't love them. We can't save them. We can't try to argue for their acquittal. We have to systematically find guilt. We're not allowed to love such a person. This is the worst of the worst. Someone tries to entice others to idolatry. 6 distinct mitzvos. We have 3 mitzvahs that relate to a city that is found, the majority of people are following idolatry. And the last one's a bit tangential, and that is to not self-flagellate over the dead. Someone dies, a relative dies, you're so sad, you're so depressed, you're beside yourself with anguish. Don't cause yourself a wound in the way of the idolaters. Lots of mitzvahs in our parsha that relate to idolatry. And in general, throughout the whole Torah, there are more than 50 mitzvos. A huge percentage of the 613 mitzvos in the Torah in general relate to idolatry. And it raises a question. We're reading this today, 2024. Most of us have never seen this sort of idolatry that was present in the land of Canaan. And we could perhaps consider, how much does this have to do with our lives today? How much idolatry are we privy to in modernity? You read about the ancients, even in the Torah, but in the subsequent books, and it's not even contested by any of the other sources. They were obsessed with idolatry. And they would want to bow and genuflect and serve and libations and sacrifices and human sacrifices. They were obsessed with this. And we don't see the appeal. We have zero inclination, zero interest to bow, to prostrate, to genuflect to idols. And the truth is, it wasn't always like this. The Talmud tells us that the desire for idolatry in yesteryear was exceptionally fierce. There's a story to this effect featured in the Talmud, the book of Sanhedrin, page 102b. It's telling a story of Rav Ashi. Who is Rav Ashi? Rav Ashi is the primary architect of the Babylonian Talmud. He is to Talmud what Rabbi Judah the Prince is to Mishnah, one of the most significant personalities in our history. And the Talmud tells that Rav Ashi was giving a lecture. And he was telling his students, he was giving them a cliffhanger. And he was saying, tomorrow we're going to discuss our friends, the kings of our people that went awry, that went off, that followed idolatry. He's trying to, I guess, gin up some excitement for tomorrow's lecture. Tomorrow we're discussing our friends, our pals, those teens that went astray. And that night, he has a dream. And who does he witness in his dream? Menashe, Teen Menashe, one of the friends, one of the pals of Rav Ashi that he was slated to discuss on the morrow. Now, there's a multi-hundred-year gap in time. Rav Ashi's about the year 500 or so. And Menashe is almost 1,000 years prior to that. Menashe appears in the dream. And he tells him, Rav Ashi, you're calling me a pal? As if we're equal? I'm much greater than you. That's what Menashe tells Rav Ashi. King Menashe, king of Judah. I'm your colleague, I'm your equal, I'm your peer. I'm much more superior to you. And he begins to grill him in matters of halacha. He starts challenging him and asking him questions. And he proves to Rav Ashi that he's a gigantic Torah scholar. And Rav Ashi responds to him in the dream. He says, oh, wait a minute. You're obviously someone who, you're a special scholar. He's duly impressed with King Menashe's Torah prowess. So why did you do all that idolatry? Why are you reviled as a villain, as one of the kings of Israel that loses their portion in the world to come because of your obsession with idolatry? Why did you do all that idolatry? And he responds, he says, you have no idea. You come from the world, from the universe, after the desire for idolatry went extinct. If you, Rav Ashi, the great Rav Ashi, the architect of the Babylonian Talmud, if you were around, if you were alive, if you were subject to the same temptations that we had to serve idolatry, not only would you serve idolatry, you would run to serve idolatry, and you wouldn't be content with just running. You'd gird your loins, lift up your cloak, your robe, so you could run faster to the house of idolatry. That's how intense the desire for idolatry used to be. Chastened by this dream, Rav Ashi began his lecture a bit differently than he was planning. It wasn't about our pals, our chums, these teens. It was our teachers. He had a degree of respect and reverence for these teens that went astray. The desire for idolatry used to be exceptionally fierce, but that desire was rendered extinct. And the Talmud, in two places, tells us what happened, what changed. The change came at the beginning of the Second Temple era. In the waning times of prophecy, the leader of the nation was a man named Ezra the scribe. And he was the head of a council known as the Anshe Knesset Hagdol, the men of the great assembly. And they undertook an initiative to eliminate the desire, the Yetzer Hara, for idolatry. And they succeeded in annulling it, in uprooting it, in removing it. And it's a very dramatic account of what they did. They petitioned God. We want to get rid of this. We know, they tell God, the only reason why we have a desire for idolatry, it's only for our benefit, because you want us to overcome this so that we will receive reward for overcoming such a difficult challenge. We're not interested. We want to opt out. We don't want it, and not its reward. This is the force that caused us so much anguish. It destroyed the temple. It burned the sanctuary. It caused the righteous ones to die. It caused us to be exiled from our land. It caused us so much suffering. We don't want it. Yeah, we understand. You gave it to us for our benefit. We're opting out. We would like to get rid of it. And they cried, and they prayed, and they fasted for 3 days. And after 3 days, they received a message from heaven. Your prayer was accepted. Now, as an aside, it's been pointed out, the way they received the prophetic message that their petition was accepted, there was a note that was parachuted down from heaven. And on it, it said the word emet, emes, truth. And that's the signet of God, the Talmud tells us. God agrees. If you analyze just this point, this is a fascinating Talmud featured in the book of Yom on page 69 and in the book of Sanhedrin, page 64. One of the big themes of this Talmud is this unusual way in which this prophecy was conveyed. We know that the men of the Great Assembly included the last members of the prophetic class. Couldn't God have sent a message via the prophets? I accept your terms. I will eliminate this Yetzer Hara. It's implied from this that when the nation eliminated the desire for idolatry, they also lost prophecy, because that balance must be maintained. And therefore, the only way to convey that God accepted, he acceded to their request, it's only via this very low level, very low grade, albeit kind of cool, way of conveying God's acquiescence to their request. The Talmud proceeds, and it's very dramatic, and we have to probably spend a lot of time to analyze all the nuance and subtleties in what the Talmud is saying. It describes what the Yetzer Hara of idolatry looked like and where it came from and what they did with it. It's very fascinating. I would recommend that you look at it. Page 64a in the book of Sanhedrin. How they contained it, how they caught it, how they contained it. It's very dramatic. And the Talmud proceeds and says, well, the sages figured once we're getting rid of desires that are harmful, let's get rid of the other twin tower, so to speak, the desire for immorality. Wouldn't that be great? No immorality. We could just focus on Torah, and all the nonsense will slip away from us, and we'll never be humbled by all these petty desires. Wouldn't that be great? They did that as well. And then they realized, well, actually, that desire we kind of need for continuity and perpetuation of the world, because everyone stopped procreating. The second you get rid of the desire for immorality, procreation ended. And even the animals ceased to procreate. There were no new eggs, the Talmud tells us. So they realized that we kind of need. It plays a very vital function. Even though it's a double-edged sword, it can be very dangerous. This is the Talmud's account of what happened. There was a desire. There was a fierce desire. The great King Menashe, who was a greater sage than the architect of the Talmud, Rav Ashi, he fell prey to idolatry. And he testifies that Rav Ashi himself would have succumbed to idolatry. It was that intense, but it was made extinct, thanks to the intervention and prayer of the men of the great assembly led by Ezra. And therefore, when we analyze the Torah, and we see the many and repeated warnings against idolatry, we may have a hard time seeing what the relevance for us is. But the truth is, we cannot fathom why someone would have that desire. We don't have that desire. We're physiologically different than they were. We cannot understand what would impel someone to seek to worship pagan deities of wood and stone. And therefore, some may argue that, well, we still have to read these parts of the Torah, but they are for a different time. It's not relevant to us. Some may argue thusly. But there's a different angle. Instead of saying that idolatry has nothing to do with us, and today we're immune to idolatry, and today we ought to focus elsewhere, on a subtler level, on a deeper level, we discover that although full-blown idolatry is not something that we wrestle with today, the fundamental concept of idolatry is still alive. And it's still strong amongst us, and we still must reckon with it. Yes, the idolatry that we have today, it's not the same as that existed in yesteryear. But as a matter of principle, idolatry the notion. What's idolatry about? It's attributing power to anything, to anyone aside from God. That's the essence of idolatry. That's the concept of idolatry. And that still very much reigns. And I want to illustrate this with an idea and a verse and a mitzvah in our Parsha. And this idea was developed, I saw it in the works of the great Rabbi Rucham. Our Parsha tells of the false prophet. One of the mitzvahs in our Parsha, the way to idolatry. Don't hearken to the false prophet. The verse tells us, chapter 13, verse 2, when there may arise in your midst a navi, a prophet, or a dreamer of dreams, and he gives you a sign or a wonder or a miracle. There's a prophet. I claim to be a prophet. I'm speaking in prophecy. And I'll prove that I'm legit by doing a sign, a wonder, a miracle. And when you believe it, the guy pulls it off. The verse continues. He pulls it off. That sign, that wonder, the miracle that they predicted, it turned out to be true. This guy is legit. He has the goods. His miracle, his prediction came true. He seemed to be credible. It looks like he proved himself. He has access to the higher realms. But then he says, the verse continues, Nelcha acharei Elohim acherim, let us go and follow a different God. He says, listen, I'm a prophet. Look at my credentials. I've proven myself. Look at these miracles. Look at these signs. Let's go worship Baal or Baal Peor or Molech or any one of the other idols, pagan deities, any other power aside from God. This is a false prophet. Lo sishma el divrei neviyahu. Do not listen to that prophet. Do not listen to that dreamer of dreams. This is 13:4. This is a prophet. Look, he seems to be legitimate. Don't listen to him. The verse cautions us. And it continues. This is amazing. Chapter 13, verse 4. Why ought we not to listen to this prophet? Ki menaseh Hashem Elokechem eschem. God is testing you. God wants to know, are you serious in your convictions of loving God with all your hearts and with all your soul? So we have this very interesting set of verses about the false prophet. There's a prophet who does miracles, who proves, you imagine, that they're legitimate. But then they claim follow a false God. Don't listen. This is a test. And there's an astonishing observation here. How does the verse start? When amongst you, from your midst, will arise a prophet. Don't listen to this prophet. It's a test. This is a prophet. This is an actual prophet, just a false prophet. We think of a false prophet as just a snake oil salesman, a charlatan, a fraudster, a con man. That's not how the Torah addresses this person. Don't listen to this prophet. And the commentators explain a very deep point. This is a prophet. They are prophesying. They do indeed have access to some higher realm. It's just false. They have access to a higher realm. But even in the higher realms, there's falsehood. Yes, they are a prophet, but they're a false prophet that we must repudiate and thoroughly reject. That's the phenomenon featured in our Parsha. A prophet, but a false prophet. The Torah doesn't say he's lying. He's telling the truth. He's a prophet, but a prophet that we ought not to listen to. And we have to learn to discern which prophet is a real prophet and which prophet is a prophet, but a false one, but it's fraudulent. And if he says do idolatry, we know for sure he's a false prophet, even if he says to do it only once. Well, we'll make an exception. We'll do idolatry once. No, this is a false prophet. Well, what about those miracles? How they pull off those miracles? Yes, they're a prophet, just a false one. Yes, he's accessing, he's pulling data. He's making requests, so to speak, from a higher realm, but from the side of falsehood that exists in heaven or in the heavenly systems. And there's a deep principle being conveyed over here. The Almighty created a certain balance in the world. Good and bad are balanced. That's why we have free will. Only due to that can we possibly have free will. And just as good and bad can coexist in our domain, it's also true in the upper domains. And that's why in antiquity, when there was real prophecy, there was also false prophecy. And Rabbi Yerucham, whose essay I'm quoting here, he cites some examples of this. The first thing he tells us is, in Egypt, Moshe does miracles. He takes his staff, throws it onto the ground, it turns into a serpent. That is a miracle. He's legit. What does Pharaoh do? Look at my necromancers and soothsayers and gurus and sorcerers. They can do the same. They take their staff, throw them into the ground. It also turns into a serpent. What's happening over here? Moshe is doing a miracle. They are also doing a miracle. Moshe is a prophet. They are also prophets. But Moshe is a real prophet, and they're false prophets. And you have to be a very keen observer. And you have to be a truth seeker to discern and differentiate between what is a real prophet and what is a false prophet. And yes, there was ample evidence to discern between the two. For example, the Sepharno in Exodus, he highlights the fact that, yes, Moshe took a staff, threw it around, turned to a serpent. They did the same. Take a staff, throw it around, turn to a serpent, and you grab the serpent, it's a staff again. Miracles on both sides. But what does the verse say? Vayivla mate Aharon es matosam. Aaron's staff swallowed their staffs. That's something that they couldn't pull off. Moshe and Aaron, they turned the water into blood. Pharaoh is unimpressed. We could do the same. Here's some water, turns into blood. But there's a difference. Maybe on a surface level, it looks the same. When Moshe does it, the fish die. When Moshe does it, the Talmud tells us, all the waters in the world turn into blood. You have to be a keen observer. You have to be a truth seeker, but you can tell the difference. But this is an example of this phenomenon. There's a prophet here. And they're doing miracles, just like Moshe is. But one's legit and one is a fraud. A real prophet, but a real prophet from the other side. As a second example, in chapter 32 of Exodus, it tells the story of the golden calf. How were the people persuaded and deceived to make a golden calf? So you read the first couple of verses with the Rashi commentary, chapter 32 of Exodus. And it tells us that the Satan deceived the nation, misled them. And the Talmud elaborates what happened. He was trying to lead them astray. And they were expecting Moshe to come 40 days after he ascended to heaven. And it's 40 days and he's not here. And the Satan comes and tells the nation, Moshe is dead. And they didn't believe him. And the Talmud tells the story in detail in the book of Shabbos, page 89a. And the Satan now upped the ante. He creates confusion, a swirling maelstrom of confusion. Look at that. Everything's in chaos and topsy-turvy. Moshe must be dead. People didn't believe him. Until the Satan projected the coffin of Moshe in heaven, gave them a vision of prophecy that Moshe is dead. And they believed him. And they went crazy. And they sought to create a replacement. What is up? What is up with this? What did they see? They saw a prophecy, but it was a prophecy that came from the Satan. That came from the force that the Almighty created to create that balance. They had prophecy. It was a false prophecy. And there are other examples. Jeremiah 28, Kings 1, chapter 18. We're not talking about rambling lunatics, liars, charismatic Jim Jones-esque fraudsters. These are prophets, just false prophets. And that went away in the times of Ezra. Just as full-blown prophecy went away, full-blown false prophecy went away. Full-blown idolatry went extinct. But something remains. If idolatry is about favoring the other side of that balance that the Almighty created, on some level, on a conceptual level, we could do the same thing today. We can attribute our health, our prosperity, our security, our well-being, our misfortune, our disease, anything good or bad can be attributed to one system or the other system, to God or to something else. And that's modern day idolatry. That's employing that other system. If the Fed raises the rates, we're doomed. We need the distributors, we need the vendors, we need the share price, we need the boss, we need the market conditions, we need the government's largesse with taxpayer funds, of course. That will determine how well we do financially. If that's a person's sole calculus, that's modern day idolatry. Again, it's not the same thing as bowing down to an idol, but there's something similar to the concept of favoring the other system. The system that the money created that has legitimacy. There are grounds to it. But it's falling prey to idolatry on some level. It's not. We don't say that the market, the stocks and the Fed and the economy doesn't matter at all. It does have power, just like the false prophets have power. But where's the power come from? Not from God. It's a system that God created to create free will. Well, my health, it's due to my genetics or my aerobics, my Zumba class. I lift. I have a perfectly calibrated diet. I take statins. I take the GLP-1s. I have a superb physician, trainer, and nutritionist. I take my health seriously, and that's why I'm so healthy. On some level, it's a measure of idolatry. Well, thank God we live in America. We have the Second Amendment. I don't rely on the government. A well-trained militia. Okay, or maybe not. We rely on the police. I have a good alarm system. I practice jujitsu. There's a strong government. We don't have the cartels here, I've been told. And that's why we're secure. We have the neighborhood watch. That's a measure of idolatry. You know, it's election season. Everyone's on edge. I remember when I was a kid, I had a little inclination to follow the news and politics. And I remember hearing, this is the most important election of our lifetime. And I believed it. But then every single election is the same thing. If the other guy wins, we're doomed. I'm moving to Canada. But we've seen enough elections to know that this is just spin. But it seems like this time both sides are legitimately worried it's all over if their preferred candidate loses. Now, do elections have consequences? Yes. Can elected officials implement different policies? Yes. There is power to that other system. Just like we said, false prophets, they were actual prophets, but just operating on a different vector than that of God. Power was given to them, just they were false prophets. Their miracles were real miracles, but the force that powered it came from the system of impurity, that counterweight, that counterbalance of faith. Do we say diet doesn't matter? We don't say that. Physicians have power. We believe that. The economy, government, elected officials, they have power. But if that's how we attribute our success or failure, our well-being or misfortune, and we forget about God, how is that different than the false prophets? That's a very deep and subtle point. And I think it shows us there's a lot of room for us to also wrestle with not the idolatry of yore, that's extinct, but modern day idolatry. And again, I'm not claiming it's the same thing as prostrating before an idol, but we believe every single heartbeat is a gift from God. Every time you go to sleep, you are placing your soul in God's keep, so to speak, and He's watching you. And every breath is a gift from the Almighty that you have to thank God for. Every single success is a gift from God. Every single failure or suffering that we endure, regardless of how minor it may be, it's a message from God. And yes, we have to live in the physical world. That's why it's so tricky. We have to work for a living. We have to engage in commerce and in the economy. And as good citizens, we vote and we try to maintain our health. We are not Rabbi Shimon living in the cave. But even us, we have to always remember, ultimately, it's God who's in control, no one and nothing else. Everything else is given only the patina, the veneer of control, and that's a test. Just like the false prophet is given power to test us, to give us that balance, that counterweight of faith, to enable us to have free will and hopefully make the right choices. God is giving power to the false prophet in order to test us. The false prophet has power, but it is a test. When Messiah comes, there's not going to be any more idolatry. Bayomahu, on that day, God will be one and his name will be one. God will rule alone. There won't be any other system, and that's why there won't be really any other free will. Free will can only exist when there is another system. We have in the prayers of the high holidays, Vitim Loch, Ata Hashem Levadecha. We're praying, we're asking God, may you rule alone. If that was not in our prayers, we would not be allowed to say that. Wait, are you implying that God today does not rule alone? That's exactly what the prayer is implying. Because there's a whole other system. You can live a whole life and be logical, and God's not part of the picture. And that we call Mamshelas Zadon, the false system, the false empire. We want that removed from the world. We're not quite yet idolatry free. And hopefully we will witness that speedily in our days. That's the first idea I want to share with you from the Parsha. The first segment and the second segment is also about idolatry. But if the first segment was a deep idea, a very subtle idea, this one's a fun idea. I actually toyed with amending the theme for the episode. As you know, this is year 8 of the Parsha podcast. And every year we try to have a little bit of a different theme. And year 8, the theme was Dad, which is deep and deep. We're trying to go really deep into the Parsha, try to understand some of the secrets of the Parsha. But you know, it's summertime. And I'm recording this on a Sunday. I'm about to start my drive back to Houston from Canada. Maybe we shouldn't be so serious. Maybe instead of deep and deeper, we could do fad, fun and deeper. One segment that's really deep and one that's fun, and it's kind of a fad. It's something fun. It's chic. It's stylish. It's in vogue. Ultimately, I don't want to tamper with the theme. The theme is sacrosanct. It's still year 8. It's still deep and deeper, but this is a fun segment, and it also relates to idolatry. There is a quizzical comment by the Baal HaTurim, a comment that was actually censored in many editions of this great medieval era work. And it's on the verse of the false prophet. The verse says, Tiyakum b'kirbecha navi, when from within you, from amongst you, from your midst, will arise a navi, a prophet, or a dreamer of dreams. And they're a false prophet. They say, let's do idolatry. We can't listen to them. Ultimately, we read in verse 6, we have to execute them. We know that everything in history is hinted to in the Torah. That's a concept that it's a very well-developed concept in our philosophy. Everything is foretold in the Torah, even things that have not yet happened. The Baal HaTurim on this verse, as he often does, he has just 1 or 2 words where he says that this is the gematria and it's hinting to something else. So on this verse, in some older editions of the Baal HaTurim, it says that the word bikirbecha, which means in your midst, it equals to the words zu ha'isha. This is the woman. Now, what does that even mean? So the commentators explain that actually there's this part of the comment was censored. It was removed. When the verse says "Tikum b'kirbecha navi," in your midst will be a prophet. Those 2 words, not just b'kirbecha navi, those 2 words equal zu ha'isha. This is the woman, ubena, and her son. And this is the reference in the Torah to that woman and her son that caused us a lot of trouble, the JC figure, the Christian hero. This is where it's hinted to the Torah. A false prophet from your midst that says, let's do idolatry. We have to execute them. And of course, in the medieval times, the Jews in Europe, they suffered tremendously and grievously at the hands of the Christians. And it's not a surprise that the sages would find references to this false prophet in the Torah, because of course everything is foretold in the Torah. And it's also not a surprise that this will be removed by the Christian censors, that they don't want to have their hero portrayed as a false prophet who led the Jews astray, even though that's exactly what he did and what he was. Now, a little bit later on in this chapter, we find another, perhaps, hint for this personality. The great Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, one of the great rabbinical figures of the 18th century, he had a conversation with a priest. And the priest says to him, well, you say that everything's hinted to in the Torah. Where is JC hinted to in the Torah? So he pointed him to chapter 13 of Devarim, verse 7. It talks about the worst thing that someone could be in the eyes of the Torah, an enticer for idolatry. Someone's trying to persuade other Jews to do idolatry. And the verse says, Tia sischa, which means when they will lead you astray, achicha, your brother, ben imecha, the son of your mother, or your son, or your daughter, or your wife, or your friend. If any one of these people try to convince you, persuade you, entice you to do idolatry, then all the laws of the entice of idolatry are in place. As we mentioned earlier, the 6 separate mitzvahs, not to love them, we have to pursue them, we have to treat them very, very harshly. This is the worst sort of criminal in our jurisprudence. So Rabbi Eibeshitz observed that the verse says it's your brother, the son of your mother. Why doesn't it say the son of your father? If it's someone half-brothers, they could say, well, you could have a half-brother from your father, a paternal half-brother, or a maternal half-brother. Why does it single out a maternal half-brother in chapter 13, verse 7 of our Parsha? Is this implying that If it was a paternal half-brother, they cannot persuade you to do idolatry. The Torah is hinting at this Christian hero who claims, or the claim is made regarding him, he's only a brother from the mother. Why? Because there ain't no dad. Of course, we know the true story. There is a dad. It's just quite shameful and ignominious. But this is the hint in the Torah, says Rabbi Eibeshitz, for the existence of this personality that comes, of course, much, much later. I will give you a third reference later on in our book, chapter 31, verse 16. This is in Parshat Vayelech, the very end of the Torah. God tells Moshe, behold, you're going to die. And God foretells that the nation will arise and will deviate and will go astray and follow Elohei Nechar Ha'aretz, the false gods of the land. And again, the medieval commentators, they find actually two references over here. The gematria of the word Elohei Nechar, which means false gods, equals the word for Yeshu and Miriam, JC and Miriam and his mom, and that's hinted to a false god. And Elohei Nechar Ha'aretz, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. The full three words, Elohei Nechar Ha'aretz, is Yeshu and Miriam, and just Elohei Nechar, the false god, that equals 316, which is the gematria of the word Yeshu. Now, it's interesting that our sages have found three references in the Torah of verses that describe idolatry and warnings for us to not capitulate and yield to this in any way, hinting at the Christian hero and describing him as a false prophet, one that must be executed as an enticer for idolatry and as a description of when the nation can stray and follow a false god of the land. I want to share with you something fascinating that I heard this week for the first time. It's a teaching in the Talmud, in the book of Arachin, page 32b. And it's comparing Ezra. We spoke about Ezra already, the leader of the men of the Great Assembly. Ezra, the scribe, the leader of the Jewish people at the beginning of the Second Temple era. And it's comparing Ezra to Joshua. Joshua is the leader of the nation when they enter the land and they have the conquest of Canaan. And the Talmud criticizes Joshua by saying that Joshua should have done what Ezra did. Joshua enters the land, and we know there's a system, there's a convention, there's a history. Ezra, men of the Great Assembly, they prayed, they cried, they fasted for 3 days, they petitioned God. And they asked God, we don't want not it and not its reward. And we understand that you only give it to us for our benefit. We want to opt out. And they gave a litany, a list of all the terrible things that happened to the nation as a result of this desire. We don't want it. We want to opt out. And indeed, the floating note from heaven signaled that God agreed. Ezra did it. 800 years or so after Joshua led really more than 900 years after Joshua led the conquest of Canaan. Says the Talmud, why didn't Joshua do it? Joshua could have done it. The Talmud, very interesting, the Talmud says that Moshe could not have done it. Because Moshe was not in the land of Israel. He died before the nation entered. So we cannot blame Moshe for not doing it because it was not possible. He didn't have the merit of the land of Israel. The merit of the land of Israel is special that it creates the conditions in which the elimination of idolatry is possible. So Moshe is not held to task for not destroying idolatry completely, permanently, as Ezra did. But Joshua, he should have done what Ezra did. Ezra is praised. He took concrete steps to eliminate idolatry. And Joshua is criticized. He should have done it. He had the opportunity to do it. He had the merit of the land of Israel, and he didn't do it, and therefore he is criticized. Now, it's very interesting. is that the Talmud explains that there is a scriptural reference to the criticism of Joshua. And it tells us that in the book of Nehemiah, one of the books of the scripture, chapter 8, verse 17, the word Joshua is spelled differently than the way it's spelled throughout the rest of the Torah. And as we know, when the Torah wants to criticize someone, very often it deducts a letter from that person's name, and that's a sign of divine displeasure with a certain person. Famous example that we've spoken about in the past, the princes, when they donated, they tarried in the donation for the tabernacle, for the name Hanasim is spelled without a letter Yud as a form of criticism. Joshua is criticized for not eliminating idolatry when he could have, as Ezra did in the future. And how is Joshua criticized? The word Yehoshua, spelled Yud, Hey, Shin, or Vav Shin, Ayin. The Hey is taken out of his name once in the book of Nehemiah, chapter 8, verse 17. Why is Joshua thus rebuked and castigated by the Torah, by scripture? Because he failed to do what Ezra did. He failed to eradicate the idolatry from the world. Now, the Kabbalists, they make a very startling, we'll call it a hint. Because if you take the Hey out of the word Yehoshua, you're left with Yeshua, which is very similar to the Hebrew name for the Christian hero, Yeshu. And the Kabbalists tell us that the connection between this story, it's not a coincidence. Why? Yehoshua, Joshua, had the opportunity to completely eliminate idolatry the second they entered the land. And he should have done it, the Talmud tells us. And because he didn't do it, idolatry was allowed to fester. And remnants, vestiges of idolatry came from our nation to the world. It's a great embarrassment to our people via this JC character. How did idolatry, how was it allowed to spawn from our people? On some level, of course, we cannot criticize any one of these titans. And even this criticism it's very muted. One letter is removed. Joshua is one of the great heroes of our people of all time. But on some level, there's a little bit of criticism that is fitting for Joshua, that he allowed idolatry to continue, and thus vestiges of it, they actually trickled out in the form of this Yeshu character. On some level, on some dimension, in some way, the emergence of JC, of this horrific idolatry, it is attributable to Joshua's negligence in not doing what Ezra did in cleansing the land of idolatry immediately when he had a chance. Moshe did not have a chance, but Joshua did. I heard this for the first time this week, mind-blowing. And I wanted to maybe offer some speculation of my own to this. You recall, this is not the only time that Joshua had a name change. Originally, Joshua was called Hosea. Now, the Torah only mentions that a few times. Even when he's at the beginning of the story, he's called Yehoshua, the Ramban. Others talk about how the Torah calls him Yeshua because his name ultimately will be changed, even at the time he was not called Yehoshua, he was called Hosea. But in the book of Numbers, prior to the episode of the spies, Moshe prays for Joshua, and he renames him Hosea, became Yehoshua. A letter Yud is added to his name. And Rashi explains that's a form of prayer. That's how Joshua overcame the sin of the spies, because of this prayer and because of this letter Yud that was added to his name. So in one part of Joshua's storyline, a Yud is added to his name. And here in this one verse again, and as the Talmud in the book of Racham, page 32b, explains, a letter Hey is removed from Joshua's name. And perhaps we can speculate that the letter Yod and the letter Hey, they have very significant symbolism and meaning in our philosophy. The Talmud tells us in the book of Menachos on page 29b, we've mentioned this a few times, that God, the name of God, the Yud and the Hey, he used that to create the world. And the world to come, Olam Haba, was created with the letter Yud. It's very small. Not so many people are going to be privy to Olam Haba. The letter Yud is the most spiritual of letters, and thus the spiritual world is created with the letter Yud, whatever that means. This world is created with the letter Hey, Yud and the Hey. And the shape of the Hey is such, it's like a Daled. So one horizontal line and then a vertical line at the right edge of the horizontal line. And it's got a floating half leg at the other side of that would-be square. The Talmud explains, why is this world created with the letter Hey? Because if someone's inside the world and they fall out, they sin and they become someone who's just out of the world, there's a way for them to enter. They could go back to the little window on the top left part of the letter Hey. They can make their way back in. They can repent. They could find a little window to re-enter the world. That's what the Talmud says. Again, it's a mysterious Talmud. We can spend a lot of time just trying to understand what this means. But for us, this world is created with the letter Hey. The world to come is created with the letter Yud. When Moshe wants to spare Joshua, to ensure, to reinforce and steel Joshua against the plot, the scheme of the spies, he wants to prevent Joshua from falling prey to the machinations and schemes and devilish plot of the spies. He gives him a letter Yud. Well, the letter Yud, that's the force, that's the letter, that's the spiritual energy that creates the world to come. And the world to come is very different than this world. Moshe was endowing Joshua with a force of the world to come to the exclusion of this world. He was empowering Joshua's association with the world to come, and thus, by definition, he was removing a little bit of Joshua's affiliation to this world, and thus Joshua was elevated above this world, and thus the spies who were plotting and scheming in this world, Joshua is now not as much as he was subject to their influence. He's more heavenly, he's more ethereal, and thus he's above them, and that's how he will avoid being swept away into their plot. That's how the letter Yud helped Joshua overcome the temptations and the risk of him joining the spies. Perhaps we can speculate. Joshua maybe had a bit of an overcorrection. He got the letter Yud. It made him more heavenly, more removed from this world, and thus more able to withstand what would have maybe dragged him down to follow the spies. But perhaps he became too heavenly, we're told, that he failed to reckon with this unconscionable, indefensible, abject corruption, that there's still idolatry in this world. In this world, he became a little bit too heavenly, and thus, in this world, where there's idolatry, you enter the land, there's still idolatry, that letter Hey, on some level, he lost it. And once in all Scripture, the letter Hey is removed from him, he started off, Hoshea became Yehoshua, the Yud was added. He added the Yud while maintaining the Hey. But in one place in Scripture, he's called Yeshua without the Hey. Why? Because he became so elevated, he became so removed from this world, and that's perhaps why he failed to cleanse it of idolatry. Now remember, of course, unless the Talmud criticizes Joshua, we would never, ever dream of doing it. But the Talmud does do that. He should have eliminated idolatry like Ezra did. And for that reason, his name was altered. And perhaps, as the Kabbalists hint, that's what allowed JC, the false prophet, the foreign god, the son of a mother, to emerge. There's a little vestige of idolatry that still existed, but not forever. We hope and pray to be able to witness that day when all idolatry real idolatry or conceptual idolatry that we talked like we talked about, it's all eliminated completely and totally and permanently. Bayomahu, on that day, God will be one and his name will be one, the throne of God, which on some level, as we read in chapter 17 of Exodus, is incomplete, will be made complete. That lofty mission of Abraham will be accomplished. May we all be so fortunate to witness that day. Thus concludes the special Sunday edition of the Parshat podcast. I finished recording. I'm heading on the road. Wish me luck. Send me an email. Rabbi@wolbe@gmail.com. Of course, we end off in prayer. May Hashem protect all of us and all of our brethren in the Holy Land. Have a wonderful week. See you, please God, next week from the Torch Center in Houston, Texas. May we get together to study Torah in good health and in great spirits. And again, that email address is rabbi@wolbe@gmail.com. I look forward to your questions and comments and your feedback. Okay.
Rabbi, quick question. Are we meeting,
Yes.
We're going to push our meeting there at Torch until October, correct?
I'm fine with whatever y'all want. I'm happy to.
Well, it might be kind of soon with you getting home and doing it, next week or whatever. So
I think we could. You're saying about just meeting in Torch?
right.
I'm going to be in Torch anyhow. Please God. Hopefully you got there in good, in one piece and all safe and all that. But I'm fine if y'all come.
Let me look at the calendar here. Sandy, you want to pitch in? That'd be next Sunday, the 1st.
Yeah, we briefly talked about it before you came in, that Rabbi feels like we could come on the 1st.
Okay.
I think so. I think it should be all right.
We won't do our celebration, but
No, not the celebration. I have to prepare for that a little bit, but I see no reason why we can't get together in person. I know we missed a week, a month or two in the summer, so and we'll still have it on Zoom. So unless you guys, how about we keep it open and we'll be in touch towards the end of the week.
Okay. Sandy, you just kind of help me on that, and we'll coordinate it back and forth on that.
And again, we'll for sure be Zoom.
Harvey had a question too. Or
would you summarize again? I know we're talking about Joshua and the Yud and the Hey. How about Ezra? How did he eliminate all idolatry?
Well, he didn't eliminate idolatry. He eliminated the desire for idolatry. The way he did it is by him together with the men of the Great Assembly. They did 3 days of prayer and fasting, and they petitioned God in a way that proved to be successful to eliminate the desire for idolatry. Okay. Not idolatry, eliminate the desire for idolatry.
Got it. Okay.
And therefore, thenceforth, there is no desire for idolatry, even though the concept of idolatry still, of course, exists.
Okay.
And you do have remnants of idolatry, but not the same desire that existed previously, and not, of course, the same ferocious desire that so bedeviled a great king like Menashe.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Maybe we'll stop here. I know we usually have time for tons of questions, but I want to hit the road. I got a lot of driving today, please God. And
well, be safe, Rabbi.
Safe travel.
Thank you, everyone. I'll see everyone, please God, next week. And I really appreciate y'all indulging me doing the Parshat podcast here with you together. This was a delight. I really enjoyed it, and I appreciate and love all of y'all. And I'll see you, please God, next week, same time.
Shalom, shalom.
Thank you.
Take care.